Okay, welcome back from the break. So now we have the second part of this session, and the first keynote speaker in this part is Fritz, who is online, and from Radboud University from the Netherlands, and he's going to talk about polyculture, plenty of water, reducing CO2 emissions, and sequestering carbon in soils and biomass in wet peatlands. So, Kristian, do you hear us?
I do.
Yes.
Good afternoon, everyone.
We would like to see you.
Yeah, my camera's on, so hope that you...
Now we see you. So then we would like to see your slides. Great. Now we see your slides. So welcome.
Thank you for having me this afternoon. I hope you had a beautiful lunch and enjoyed the morning sessions. I found them very interesting. I'll take you into the world of water and carbon, and my background is on water and soil biogeochemistry, and peatlands with full of organic matter. They are perfect places to combine this. And my team and I, we work on an entire range from incubation, experimental work to landscape scale carbon flux quantifications. And I will take you to some of the results touching on polyculture and carbon farming. Some backgrounds. As you've noticed in some of the earlier sessions or presentations, peatlands, they play an important role in our effort to increase and improve soil health. And the main reason is that after drainage, peatlands emit large amounts of CO2 and nitrous oxides and methane through ditches. So the drainage changed a carbon neutral system into a carbon and greenhouse gas emitting system. And in a European context, we're talking about more than 200 million tons of CO2 equivalent. So that's substantial given the ambitions we have within the Green Deal. Rewetting in peatlands solves most problems related to the carbon losses. It also restores some of the nature values and some services like land subsidence, reversal, land growth, and so forth. However, it doesn't solve the biomass provision and using the land option. And this is where polyculture comes into play. Polyculture in this presentation entails biomass harvest and biomass use at water levels that are high enough to conserve the peat and to conserve or even improve the provision of ecosystem services. So that combination of conserving the peat, low emission, and ecosystem services with biomass use, that's polyculture. And polyculture is important in preventing large-scale losses of productive land. The Radboud University I work for, we are here in the Netherlands, and every day we are on the threat, we're on the brink of being taken over by water, and future climate scenarios and the ongoing drainage of peatlands only make things worse. This is where polyculture plays an important role. And it does so by embracing water. So it doesn't fight the water, it doesn't work against it. It works with the water, and it works with flood-tolerant crops and machinery that is adapted to water. And a lot of this has been worked out here in the Netherlands because water's everywhere, and the work around the technical solutions around water, they are also everywhere, but not every time available. And polludiculture regulates and stores water. Here's an example from Germany, and because it's not only the flood protection, it's not only flood adaptation, but it's also prevention. By sucking up water after large rain events, the soil acts like a sponge. And I will take you now to three main avenues where polludiculture is beneficial. First of all, is through revetting, it reduces greenhouse gas emission. Second one is the polludiculture products, they replace fossil-based products, so that in itself also has a reduction of the total emission of the system. And the products made from polludiculture crops, polludiculture plants, they themselves, depending on the circumstances and conditions, they can also provide long-term carbon sequestration. A good example is reed on roofs, and later on I will also show some more examples from long-term carbon sequestration in biomass. However, today I would like to take you into a fourth dimension of positive effects of polludiculture, and that's the active storage of soil carbon. Here's an example just north of Amsterdam, where soil subsidence got reversed. Sphagnum polludiculture was put into place, and so the soil goes up, it actively stores carbon. This is what the rest of the presentation will be mainly concerned about. Here's an example how a sphagnum polludiculture may look like, or looks like at a farm scale. There's a number of publications on that. The soil is prepared, the water levels are raised, the crop is sown and protected, in this case with straw, but there are different options. And 9 months later, the crop established largely. The water levels, as you can see, are still at the surface, thereby protecting the peat. And carbon now can start accumulating, and biomass also starts accumulating. The biomass part, this is where farmers and land users are usually interested in, and our group at the Radboud University, together with universities through all Europe, we investigated yields in a number of European projects, and the range, what you see without now going into detail, is that it's usually lower than high intensive crops or highly fertilized grasslands, but on average they do pretty well. Right? So 10 tons of dry matter per hectare per year, that is something that can be achieved with proper management. And for peat mosses, sphagnum in particular, that's more about volume per hectare, volume of 200 cubic meter, that is also achievable. So that is enough to at least to get the farmers on the table, at the table. But for carbon farming, it's not so much about above ground biomass, it's more about below ground storage. And this is, I think, where a lot of polludiculture crops and polludiculture systems have an advantage, because below ground productivity is high and active, whereas above ground the crop can be harvested. It's a permanent crop, so it's it's a double win strategy. Here in the Netherlands, but also in Denmark, Germany, in the Baltic states, Finland, much can be learned from commercial reed harvest, and because they have identified product avenues They also have identified management strategy plans on a landscape scale where logistics come into place, and also they have a view on long-term sustainable yields. And here, for example, in the Netherlands, we have 7,000 hectares of reed biomass production only. And in Dutch, they are also called reed farmers. And it's a source for fossil-free building material, and the demand for this building material is ever increasing, also because timber should partly stay also in the forests. Here's an example of winter harvest of typha, which is a similar crop like reed or Phragmites, which can be harvested by adapted machines, and it's a very good insulation material. In the Netherlands, we have a number of companies that have adapted machinery. In the future, they would like to increase, let's say, the efficiency, so which means larger machines and also better logistics. And but there's already a lot available. There's also new machines tested and improved. So that is, I think, good news for both above ground and below ground, because as you can see, they are adapted to ride on very soft soil. So there's no need to drain the soil, but the machines, they can keep up with the conditions. And another important aspect is the technology and knowledge transfer between land authorities. There we also had a lot of good examples here in the Netherlands. As you can see there in the background, in a water storage area, typha biomass has been selectively grown to be harvested and to store large amounts of water. We'll show some numbers on that, and driven by land and water authorities in combination with local and regional farmers, and also the supply chains. So this is how it can look like. There's a growing demand for bio-based products, but there's also customers that are much more sensitive to low carbon product chains, low carbon or carbon neutral products, and they do also ask what's happening with the soil. And before we get into the soil, one more slide on the above ground biomass. Here I have three typical four paludiculture crops, and for typha, which is cattail, we see that we are around 20 tons of CO2 equivalents that is stored in the biomass, and Phragmites does the same. And for sphagnum, I left it out because at the moment, most of the sphagnum biomass is used to replace fossil peat and substrates for horticulture. So sooner or later, that carbon will also be emitted to the atmosphere. But there's not saying that in the future there might be a permanent use for sphagnum fibers as insulation materials, as decoration. There are a lot of options, just to give you an idea. And there's also a diversification of paludiculture products and use of above ground biomass. In a study together with the Groningen University, our colleague Vaya Liu quantified ecosystem services and compared them with drained grasslands, which you can see here on the left-hand side. So, grasslands drained for dairy farming mostly, and some extensive farming. And here we have reeds and sphagnum with lower emission, that's on the y-axis, and with national indicator figures, we also monetized the different ecosystem services. And what we can see is that the further away we go from the dairy system, the smaller the revenues for biomass is, and the higher the revenues for greenhouse gas emission reduction will be. And for farmers, this is now new, and you also heard that in earlier sessions. But sooner or later, it's about balancing both. And I also have a blue bar in it. As you can see, water storage, that is an important issue here in the Netherlands. And it's also important because water is a resource for food production. It's not only flood control, but it's also food security. And 5,000 cubic meters of water per hectare, that is worth a lot of money, as you can see. So that, this gives a little bit the boundaries land management options are, developing in at the moment in the coming few years. Now to the heart of this talk, the carbon sequestration potential in the soil. I clearly mentioned it's a potential because there is little research on the long-term fate of that carbon. But if we only look at potential, what is sequestered by the plants below ground, then sphagnum and reed, they have substantial rates. We're talking about 5 up to 10 tons of CO2 equivalents in the soil, and but also plants that are not typically peat forming like typha, they also accumulate carbon. And for the sphagnum, we clearly have to state that it's a matter whether you keep that carbon or whether it's harvested for fibers again. So there's a trade-off depending on what is more important in the land use. For reed, it's very simple. You harvest above ground and you leave the carbon below ground. It's just to highlight this again, that paludiculture offers that opportunity to do both. And current research is with colleagues in Germany and in a cattail and nature-inclusive paludiculture site. There's research ongoing on improving carbon sequestration rates and also understand bottlenecks and environmental conditions that lower sequestration rates. And one important one that we can see is that the paludiculture fields are usually small in size, and because the surrounding is drained, they also are drained in a dry summer, for example, and in places where water supply is insufficient, then the water shortage increases. And another aspect is, depending on the paludiculture crop, but there's herbivory, can be birds, it can be also deer, and that is something like in many agricultural systems, is something to adapt management to and make the right crop choice for your area. Here's some geese. Important aspect that our research found is that paludiculture offers ways and also funding for active water management. In the background, you see the Dutch windmills. This is how it all started and led to substantial loss of peatlands. But now the tides are turning, and you see that farmers involved in paludiculture, they are much more sensitive to water management and also to storing water, keeping the water in, and saving it for the dry season. And they come with a lot of innovative options, and we see that a lot of theirs happening, and a large benefit is the extra water storage that we have. And we also quantified that, also keep that really simple here with a number of sites, is that, again, reed and has a very high water storage potential, and so that is above 10,000 cubic meters per hectare. But also Taifa can store large amounts of water, not so much in the early spring. And sphagnum does most of the water storage below ground by the sponge effect, and that is it's a bit it's substantially smaller, but they do help with that. And here's an example how it then looks like. The water levels, they're close to the surface, a little bit above, a little bit below. But in recent work, we compared it with irrigated drained peatlands, so where the water level is increased. And the difference with paludiculture systems is that paludiculture systems are 30 to 40 centimeters wetter, and this is what you can see here. And a nice effect of these high water tables is, and the combination with below ground carbon sequestration, because the carbon has to go somewhere, is that subsidence is reversed. So the land goes up. And this accretion rates, they are highest for sphagnum, but also reed is substantial. And the dashed line indicates the average subsidence we experience at the moment here in the Netherlands. In Germany, it's a bit higher, I suppose. But here we can see that we're playing in the same order of magnitude. Again, the question is, can we extrapolate this for 20 or for 50 years? For sphagnum, there's some good evidence. As long as the water table keeps going up together with the crop, then reverse subsidence rates are substantial. I will go and finish by talking about nutrients and carbon farming. It has different aspects to it. One is that by removing, by using above ground biomass, like in all agricultural systems, we need to balance nutrient exports and nutrient sequestration or nutrient losses. And here's an example with Taifa. So nutrients need to get in. For paludiculture system, often the former, let's say the revetted peat, usually is nutrient rich, in terms of phosphorus even too rich. And here's an example for Phragmites and Taifa, so reed and cattail, that give an indication that for a high biomass yield of 15 tons, it also means that at least 200 kilograms of nitrogen are removed and also would need to be replaced for long-term sustainable yields. This graph is a bit more complicated, but it conveys a similar message, that it depends on where, when, and with which use biomass is removed. So when here's the summer in the middle, then the biomass is the highest. A lot of the properties related to nutrients are highest, so the removal is highest. But in October already and November, biomass is lower, and depending on the crop can be much, much lower. And but also the need to replace nutrients will be much lower. So that's so in case that, for example, phosphorus removal plays a role, then it's worth considering removal during the summer. And when it's about a balanced system, then winter harvest, and at the end of the day, also sphagnum is the most efficient one there. Another aspect next to nutrients is our background emission. My baseline here for this presentation is that the site is already revetted. So that means that carbon dioxide emissions have been lowered compared to the drained counterparts. But on the other hand, there's extra methane following revetting. That's outbalancing methane from the ditches. But at the end of the day, there's usually is extra methane in the systems. And our group also does eddy covariance and chamber work on that aspect. And what we see is that there's, that especially sphagnum there is also a very good choice, and the combination between Carex and certain TIFA systems, so that they are really low in emission. Whereas the rest of the system, they are lower than the reference, but they still have elevated emission that you need to take into account as some sort of background emission. And interesting is what we see in the data is also that, especially when open water bodies are in the fields, which are encircled here, this is where a lot of emissions come from that area.
You have 2 minutes.
2 minutes left. Perfect. Yeah. And they are an important source of methane. Then I will speed a little bit up. Come to the final remarks. Upscaling of carbon farming on wet peatlands, what's needed for that. We had 10,000 years of, let's say, dryland agriculture, and this needs to now be crammed in one generation, and we're doing quite well. An important thing here is that paludiculture is very effective in space. I mean, I presented these high numbers of carbon sequestration rates, and here we did a comparison with alternatives on the right-hand side for arable soils and bog restoration. So there we also see that the sequestration potential is much higher. And what it's needed for that upscaling is now experience on a 10 to 500 hectare scale. So several farms, also upscaling the value chain and the logistics. An MRV system for paludiculture. I know that there are several projects working on it, and there's more to come, hopefully, but they're tailor-made for the carbon sequestration part in the paludiculture system. Think of spontaneous paludiculture and open water gaps that need to be filled. And last but not least, for the society buffer functions, without going into details, our colleagues have together written a nice piece in Ambio, and biogeochemistry that keeps all these aspects I mentioned together. And yeah, you don't walk alone, do it together, co-creation and collaboration. And if I want to sum up everything, I'd like to conclude that paludiculture cropping is ready for carbon farming, and there's quite some work needed on different levels. It's more than switching from carrots to potatoes. It's the entire land and water system will be in transition. Machinery, infrastructure, and market demand, they exist, but they're still quite scattered. So they are not at the same time at the same place. So there's work to do and connecting them. And the water smart paludiculture that has an emphasis on the water surfaces. that in the next couple of years, especially with the droughts and floodings we've recently experienced again, this is, I think, where society has most benefits from it. And to make the right steps, we need farm scale of at least 10 hectare polyculture to make a working system from it. And thank you for your attention. Thank you for funders, and looking forward to hear your responses and questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Kristiina. The time is running, so I'm afraid we don't have time for questions, but you can maybe continue discussion online. And now I would like to invite our next speaker, Kristiina Lång, from Natural Resources Institute, Finland. She is going to talk about the importance of agricultural peat soils from Finland's perspective. Welcome, Kristiina.
Oh, Kati. And good afternoon. May I have my slides? Thank you. So I will give an overview of the use of agricultural peat soils in Finland. I will concentrate on the present day and the future, but in the beginning I have to mention that peat soils were crucial for food security in Finland in the past. In times when there were no machines or mineral fertilizers, peat soils were a perfect choice, actually. There are no stones and there are lots of nutrients. And you can see in this figure how well oats is growing in 1928 on peat soils. But now, you know that Finland is a really peat-rich country. So 1/3 of our area has been peatland. And the graph here shows what has been, what kind of changes there have been from 1950 to 2015. So half of the original area has been drained, mainly for forestry. Now the cultivated peat soils are 3% of this area. From all of these land use forms, so forestry, agriculture, and peat mining, we have lost even 500 teragrams of carbon since 1950. And it's been estimated that the current carbon stock in agricultural peat soils could be around 200 million tons, which means that if we continue this cultivation, then we will eventually lose this carbon, maybe in about 100 years, and the resulting CO2 and N2O emissions would be worth like the equivalent of Finland's total emissions times 10. So this is the scale we are talking about. So one importance, I think, nowadays for peat soils is this carbon stock and the mitigation potential we have there. So if Finland now aims to be carbon neutral by 2035, we should have the LULUCF, the land use sink of carbon should be as high as our remaining total emissions in 2035. And as the drained peat soils now reduce this sink by about 18 million tons, it means that there must be some potential to strengthen the sink if we just find the way to do it. The situation in general in our agricultural soils is not very good. We are losing carbon in our mineral soils, and we are draining more peat soils for agriculture. So this does not look good for our LULUCF sink goal, because the increase is something we have to abate first, and then we get some reductions in the total emissions. And this is a very simple graph showing the agricultural soils, and 12% of them are peat soils currently, and the other graph is showing the emission share of peat soils from the total emissions of agriculture, so also emissions from other sources than soils, like the animals and manure and such. So potentially this 12% could provide us emission mitigation of more than half of agricultural emissions. So if you look for cost efficiency and efficient mitigation measures per area, peat soils are your choice. Basically, if you are choosing your mitigation measures, they go to these 3 classes. So avoiding or stopping new drainage, reducing the area in use, and then changing the way they are cultivated if they remain in cultivation. And in the rest of the presentation, I will concentrate on actually raising the water table, which is actually the only way to maintain the carbon sink. The other measures just slow down the loss of the peat. And because there is not much time in this presentation and in fighting climate change, we will now concentrate on raising the groundwater table, mainly when I talk about mitigation measures. This is a cost calculation that I made years ago just to see what kind of measures we could use to, what kind of hectares we would need for reducing the CO2 emissions from agriculture by 10%. So for mineral soils, you can, for example, have catch crops or some kind of organic amendments, but you need 300 or 600,000 hectares for the same effect as for cropland rewetting. But of course, cropland rewetting of 20,000 hectares. But you can, of course, do all of this. We have plenty of area. So this is just to showcase the effect per hectare. And this led to some research on to search for this 20,000 hectares. How could we find the most potential and available land for this kind of very drastic land use changes like rewetting? And the first step was that we looked at how peat soils are cultivated. We chose a 10-year period, and we got information from the Food Authority about the crop on peat soil parcels. And here, the simple results are that about 60,000 hectares were in cereal monocultures. About the same amount was in long-term grass cultivation, so feed and fodder. But the most was in different kinds of rotations. And the total area is about 270,000 hectares. But the interesting part here was this 30,000 hectares, which seemed to be in no food production at all. So the crop was not feed, it was something like nature management field, as we call it here, luonnonhoitopelto, or something similar. If you take just one single year, it was about 30,000 hectares, because of course also this extensive use can be temporary. We also found that it's more common to have poor drainage on these extensive areas, meaning that the poor drainage drives these field parcels to extensive use. Also meaning that the landowners have a problem there, and these areas are already likely wet, so rewetting might be even an interesting option. Some of these fields will never return to food production because they have totally lost their production capacity. But we also know that part of the cereal area is also not in proper food production. Some of them produce some yields like 1 ton per hectare. And I think that's not then sustainable. And also we have found farmers who really are seeking for some solutions for that kind of field. So this 30,000 is not the whole truth. But we continued from here. So what kind of other areas there could be to find suitable areas for rewetting, for example. And we can, of course, look at the distribution of peat soils on the map, and there are different regions. In some of them, the area of peat soils is maybe just less than 10% of the total area, meaning that there are mineral soils that can replace cultivation in peat soils. But we also know that centralization of agriculture is very high, so about 30% of farms actually produce 70% of our food, or at least the farm income, which means that we have thousands of farms that do not really produce food. So combining also this information gives us a simple list where we could find kind of the priority area for rewetting. Could be the regions where proportion of peat soils is low, the fields that do not produce food or feed, the farms that do not produce food, and also the abandoned fields, which are just left with their drainage there unused. We cannot sum these areas because they are partly overlapping. But about this structural change, we know that this will continue. About 40% of farms have really stopped farming since 2000. And there are also many peat soils that are now not needed by these farms. So it would be really crucial to find ways to plan the land use after these farms quit. And you could also think that, well, part of this mitigation might occur very naturally, not affecting the future of the active farms. So I would like to present one example, what I call low-hanging fruit. So combining different spatial data, you can combine different combinations of criteria. And when we have used the soil map and information of the field parcel location, and also farmers' self-evaluation data, and for example, hydrological indices, we have mapped the peat parcels, and the example comes here. So this is a catchment, and there is a group of fields. They have red borders there, where there was no food produced for 80% of the study years. So it's a low area, likely water available for rewetting, but still this area is just kept unused there. So I hope there could be an authority going there and asking, what is your problem? We are paying you the subsidies, why don't you produce food? And how much you would need for rewetting this area. So there are this kind of problematic area. There could be benefits both for the landowner and the society. And I really hope the discussion on peat soils would be a bit further from the current discussion, because it usually goes like this. It said that we have this huge problem. Oh yes, we have this huge problem, but there are many farmers who have their most of their peat fields on peat soil. Oh yes, it's a problem. Let's stop discussing. So I would like to convey this idea that peat soils are individuals, and the peat parcels are individuals. Farms are in different situations. We could find some area that could give us this emission mitigation potential. And yeah, you can draw different kinds of maps, but it doesn't lead to actions if if the politicians don't realize this. So you just heard about paludiculture. I think it will be really interesting to see if it could lead also to such developments in Finland as it has been going in the Netherlands and in Germany. Maybe there will be a time when we also in Finland could acknowledge that maybe the forest industry is not the solution for all problems, and there could be need for new types of biomass. And there could be many benefits. We know that the industry needs biomass for replacing plastics, different kinds of construction materials and other synthetic materials and textiles and so on. Can we take it all from the forest, or should there be a new development for other types of biomass? And we can call these old peat production areas and fields that lost their production potential marginal soils. There could be many benefits from using these so-called marginal soils for new biomass production. So it would be very interesting if we could have this kind of local thinking. So if there is a facility that could use new types of biomass, there could be clusters of companies producing different materials from the same biomass, because it's not very feasible to think that we have cattail production in all over the world, all over the country. But then there could be a cattail cluster, so one company produces textile and one construction materials, and the rest is going to, for example, growing media production. At the moment, the production of growing media and bedding for animal farms is the most promising value chain of paludiculture in Finland. So we need this kind of cascade processing and regional pilot clusters of companies. To conclude, I could say that from societal perspective, it's clear that cultivated peat soils are more significant as providers of greenhouse gas mitigation than food production currently. But for a farmer, this may not be true, of course. But we should look for the low-hanging fruit. There are such. And also the existing funds in agriculture, they just could used better, because there's a lot of funding and we could use it also. Not for just maintaining the drainage, but for very innovative solutions for peat soils. And as I said, paludiculture is an interesting option. But let's go back to the past. There is a newspaper from 1829. It listed landowners who have drained peat soils, how many acres, and how they were rewarded with silver spoons and silver goblets. And there are many of these papers actually found in the libraries. And well, I think maybe during the coming years, the same families could even be rewarded for rewetting the same soils. So this is how the world is strange sometimes. But yeah, an interesting option, I think. So thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Kristiina. So now we have some time for questions. So do we have any questions online? Okay, you.
Okay, thank you, Kristiina, for your very interesting presentation. I would like to ask you actually about this. I'm Eija Hagelberg from Baltic Sea Action Group, sorry. Yeah, I would like to ask you about the previous presentation of Christian, what he told about paludic culture, and he used the term water smart paludic culture. Have you been discussing this also in Finland, or what is your opinion about that? Because I was very excited about that, and I think maybe we should more add this water holding capacity to these discussions. Maybe it could even make paludic culture more interesting for farmers in the flood areas, which are very risky for floods and so on.
Yeah, I think this is not really acknowledged. Of course, we should think of all potential or possible benefits from rewetting, and water management is one. And there was a recent study from Oulu area where actually the spatial data sets really show that draining of peat soils causes the floods, which means that rewetting might ease this problem. And this is something that maybe not the authorities or landowners don't really know.
Okay, do we have any other questions or comments? Yes.
One short comment. I am Markku Ylihala from the University of Helsinki. I am so sorry that the humanities and social scientists are not more active on this topic, because removing fields from the traditional use is such an emotional question that it really should be investigated more than it is done at the moment. And I have seen it in many other environmental issues of agriculture, that the social scientists, they see it simply as belonging to natural scientists, and they really don't want to touch that topic. But I very much hope that this will change one day.
Thank you, Markku. Yes, I agree, but I also see some come together there, because some artists, like there was a novel written about this problem when a young lady inherits peat soil from the grandfather, and how this is, then you have to think, what can you do with your peat soil? But there should be more really real science on that also, and I'm really afraid that the business, the agribusiness, might really suffer from a similar shock as we had in peat production, if we are not prepared to the changes in society. I mean, there will be a time when the consumers simply don't want to buy the food from peat soils. And I think we should prepare for that. And this should be acknowledged also there in the business. So the business model just has to change.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? Yes.
Hi, I'm Hanna Tuomisto from the University of Helsinki and Natural Resources Institute, Finland. So I just wanted to ask that are there any food crops that could be cultivated in paludiculture? Because I think all of your examples were something else than crops that we can use directly for human food.
Okay, the traditional ones would be berries, but they don't go well together with our everyman's rights. You know, if you have cloudberry there, it's very hard to protect it from the berry pickers. Then there are some herbs, which are of course not like the upscaling is difficult. You could think of something like a garden angelica, which is used as a herb in Lapland a lot, these kind of things. Also, cattail is edible, so if there is some other production, it could be also used in food industry. But really, the feed crops, they can be grown in a little bit wetter conditions than nowadays. There are some, but there would be small scale crops then.
there more questions here or online? I would like to ask about climate change adaptation. So how do you see the potential of paludiculture in that sense?
Yeah, well, the flood protection is, I think, the most important aspect in there. I don't.
So in your studies, have you kind of taken that into consideration when you have been identifying the potential?
We have not calculated anything like flood protection potential, but there is some research on that in Oulu University.
Yeah.
I don't have any numbers. Sorry.
Okay. So no more questions or comments, so we can go on with the program. Thank you very much, Kristiina. Okay, so now we have the next speaker is Caroline Lalor from the Farm Peat Project Ireland, and she's going to talk about farmers' perspectives of rebetting in the Midlands of Ireland. So now, do you hear us?
Yes, just give me a second there.
Yes, and we hear you. And now if we can have your presentation. So.
Is it coming up?
No, thank you. So please go on.
Thank you very much. And thanks to all the previous speakers as well. It's been a really interesting morning so far. So I've been asked to speak about a project that's running here in Ireland. It's called the Farm Peat Project, and we're working with farmers who have peat soils adjacent to raised bogs in the Midlands of Ireland, and also give the perspective of the farmers to this project. So my name is Caroline Lalor. I'm the project manager. I'm going to give a bit of background to the project. We have a small team working on the project, but everything that I'm explaining here, I suppose, has been a team effort. So just to briefly give you a bit of an intro where we are, obviously you're over there in Helsinki. Sorry, I'm not with you today. And our project is based here in Ireland in the Midlands. So all these little red dots that you can see here are our project sites. So I'll just zoom in and you can see we're based bang in the middle of Ireland, which is the centre of where the raised bogs, a certain type of peatland, are found in Ireland. And we have 8 project sites. All of them are based on raised bogs, as I said. Most of them are relatively intact and protected, and we have one site over here on the east, on the border of Offaly and Kildare, and that is an industrially harvested site which has currently or recently undergone its own rewetting scheme. So it's separate to our work, but the industrial company who harvested it are now rewetting it. So we're working with farmers. I suppose this is one of our sites. It's called Dangan Bog in County Offaly. And we're working with farmers who have land around the edges of the bog here. So this would be typical to the rest of our sites. There's an intact, relatively intact bog in the centre. And it's surrounded by largely agricultural land and some forestry. And I suppose similar to what the other speakers have said, some of this agricultural land near the bogs has been reclaimed in the past, and generations of work has been done to do that. And, you know, our farmers are generally very proud of the work that has gone into producing these productive fields. So as other speakers have mentioned today, it's quite an emotive issue then when you start talking about rewetting. So just to give you an idea, this is the indicative peat soil layer that we're using to indicate where these peat soils are. So you can see a lot of the agricultural land in the immediate surrounds of the bog is currently under agricultural use. And these are the fields that we're most interested in working with our farmers. It's a 2-year project, I should say, as well. It's an EIP, so we're getting European funding for this. And basically, we're being funded through the Department of Agriculture here in Ireland to work with the farmers and come up with options of how we can work with farmers to manage these peat soils better for carbon. but also for biodiversity and water quality. So I'll just explain, I suppose, the approach that we're using, and then I can give you the feedback and the perspective of the farmers that they have told us about this approach and how they feel about it. So we're using a results-based approach, which is a move away from the traditional action-based approach of agri-environmental schemes in Ireland. So traditionally, farmers in agri-environmental schemes were paid based on the actions that they took. So 10 farmers could undertake the same action, and they might get different results. Some farmers might put more effort in and try and get follow the exact specifications and do it to the best of their ability. Other farmers might not be so diligent, but they'd all get paid the same. Whereas the results-based approach focuses not so much on the actions, but on the results that are gained from what the farmer does or doesn't do. And so then the closer the result is to the desired outcome, the higher the score that the farmer receives, and hence the higher the payment. So it's a bit fairer in that regard, that the farmer who, I suppose, is producing the results gets the higher payment. The results-based approach, it's not that new in Ireland, but it's gaining traction all the time. So the first project in Ireland that used this approach was called the Burn Project, and that's in operation about 25 years. And has got great feedback from the farmers. They're very happy with it, etc. And has also gotten great results on the ground. And so there's other projects as well. The Pearl Mussel project, the Hen Harrier project, are all using this approach. So we are using this approach with our farmers. They have told us that they like this approach. They feel it's very fair. And one of the things that I love about the results-based approach also is that it rewards the farmers for the result on their ground from the first day that they join the project. They don't have to do anything in particular. They don't have to change anything necessarily. So that's it in a nutshell, I suppose, to simplify it. And we obviously have to come up with a scoring system to score the farm, get the score. The higher the score, the higher the nature quality should be, and hence the higher the payment. Just to give you an idea, we are focusing obviously on the peat soils. That's our main focus of the project. But we take a whole farm approach. So we'd also score other habitats on the farm, because they'd also be contributing to biodiversity, possibly water quality, and also carbon sequestration where you have woodlands or tree lines or hedgerows. So we have all our scorecards for these different habitats, and they're on our website if anyone wishes to look at them in more detail. But they're based, largely on the other projects, the results-based projects in Ireland that I already mentioned. We've obviously tweaked them to focus a bit more on the carbon element, especially. We have an app as well in the field to input and to help with streamlining all the digitising of the data, which is very good. The scoring, look, it's kind of intuitive. You can almost see the results here. This is going to get a low score. This is an agricultural field on peat soil. This is another one, and this is a third one in our project farms, and they all get a different score. This is a low quality, moderate quality, high quality, and hence they all get a different payment per plot. So the payments are per hectare, but they're based on quality. An important aspect also in terms of payments for farmers is this supporting actions payment. So the farmers get the results-based payment, which is based on the nature quality on the farm. But then they also have access to this supporting actions fund, which is basically to incentivize and support farmers to move towards higher quality. So if you have a farmer down here scoring quite low and they want to move to a higher scoring plot, they want to improve this plot, then we have funds there to help and support them. They contact us, we go out to the farm, we walk the farm with them, talk about the options and give them advice on how to do it. So just to give you an idea of some of the payments to farmers over the last 2 years, the maximum payment to any one farm, this is just the results-based payments, was just over €9,000. The minimum payment, 133 based on the results-based payment, and then the average payment is €2,000. Just to mention the minimum payment, we top up anyone who gets less than €800. We top them up to 800 just to, I suppose, keep them interested in the project, keep them working with us, and also to acknowledge the effort that it takes for them to be involved and liaise with us and keep engaging with us, answering questions and questionnaires, etc. And just so this is what we're paying for in terms of the results. We're paying for water levels that are close to the surface, rich biodiversity, and no damaging activities. On the farms that are more intensively managed, largely the payments are going to from these, or the payments are arising from their boundaries, which might be tree lines or hedgerows in our case. And that's where we see most of their payments are coming from, when the plots themselves are quite intensively managed. There's other payments as well that the farmers can access. I mentioned the supporting actions payments. So the total payments that we've paid to farmers to date would be €251,000, and that comes from the supporting actions that I mentioned, the results-based payments. They'd be the two main ones, and then they also get payments, smaller payments for training days, host farmers if we bring academics or students out to their farms, research farms, and monitoring. So we have some farmers who are involved in research with us, and we're measuring the greenhouse gas emissions on a subset of our farms, trying to correlate the emissions with our scoring system. So the results are just coming through. We don't have any final results, but preliminary results do suggest that our scoring system is working in relation to the greenhouse gas emissions. So in other words, a high scoring plot has the lowest greenhouse gas emissions, and a low scoring plot in our scoring system has the higher greenhouse gas emissions. But as I said, they're preliminary results, and we'll have more conclusive results in about a month, I would say. And then some of our farmers are involved in monitoring. They've been trained up to take water level measurements on their farms, and there's a couple of more farmers going to be trained up soon. So that's great as well. Just the more engaged and involved I think the farmers are, the better the long-term results will be. I suppose one thing that we find tricky is estimating the area that will be re-wet by the work that we're doing in the drains. So we have been working with hydrologists on the drains that we have re-wetted so far, or the drains that we have put in dams to re-wet. And they are using a depression model to indicate to us where the areas are likely to be re-wetted. So we're using that model to compare with our own estimate, which is based on walking the ground and aerial photography, and just kind of using a ballpark to estimate the area that might be re-wet from blocking the drains. So we're not too far off. In this case, the model is indicating that 0.8 hectares will be re-wetted as a result of installing these 6 dams, whereas we had estimated it would be 1.2 hectares. So a bit of variation there. We're going to get some more of these models done and compare to our own estimates to see how close they are in other situations.
Caroline, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you very much. I'm nearly done now. And so based on 8 farmers that have, I suppose, volunteered re-wetting actions with us, we are estimating that we would have a total of 7 hectares re-wet. So it's not huge coverage, but we never expected huge areas to be re-wet as part of a 2-year pilot project. So just to give you a quick visual on the supporting actions, some of them that have been completed to date. This was a drain where we installed some dams, and this was a pre-installation, and this is a post-installation of the dam. It has since been fenced as well off to prevent access from stock. This is an example where water quality was an issue from stock accessing a stream, and again, that has been fenced to prevent stock from accessing the stream. A big part of our project, and the big, I think, in terms of the farmers' feedback to us, is one of the things they appreciated most about the project was the knowledge that they gained and the learnings that they had as part of the project. So knowledge exchange, just emphasizing that while we all realize this is a damaged peatland, this is also a damaged peatland here, where you have the intensively managed agricultural grassland on peat. And we share all this information with our farmers at our training days. So 1 hectare of intensive agricultural grassland on peat emits approximately 20 tonnes of carbon dioxide equivalent per year per hectare. And that's equivalent to the greenhouse gas emissions coming from 4 cars being driven for a year, roughly. And that's, of course, based on our current information that we have, which might change as we get better data. Again, the knowledge exchange, a lot of farmers loved learning about the species that should be present on these peaty plots, whether it was a wet grassland or more boggy plants. And the supporting actions, like why that's important. So a lot of the farmers told us, I've lived next to the bog all my life, but I never really knew what it did for society, or as ecosystem functions in terms of carbon storage and water quality and biodiversity. So that was a big one. We love showing this slide to our farmers and to school kids as well, to compare the peats or the carbon storage capacity potential of raised bogs in Ireland and comparing it to the Amazon rainforest. The raised bogs are actually here on the right, storing over 3,000 tonnes of carbon per hectare, whereas the Amazon rainforest is a lot lower. So that's a surprise to a lot of people. Another thing that our farmers love about the approach that we take is that it's flexible and it's farmer-led. The farmers can come to us with a suggestion for an action on their farm to achieve a certain objective. So if it achieves the objective, we're happy to go with their methodology. It doesn't have to be something that's already on the list of measures. They love as well the staff being available and coming out to their farm to walk their farm and come up with a plan that suits them. And the knowledge exchange, as I mentioned, they feel like, getting together with other farmers in their area, learning about what we're doing and then finding out from each other what they're doing, that's a big plus as well. As I said, we work with schools, which I think is very important to educate the next generation coming up about the importance of these peat soils and what they're doing. So again, just in summary, flexibility is very important for farmers when you're approaching farmers and trying to get them on board. Personal interaction and relationships, learning, the actions are voluntary. It's all about carrot, and that was mentioned before, the carrot and not the stick. That's really, really important. Farmers felt that they could join our programme without having to do anything. They could just see what was being offered and take action if they wanted to. It needs to be sufficiently incentivised and there needs to be a long-term commitment. We
are running out of time.
Okay. That needs to change for the future. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Caroline. Okay, and then we have one more online speaker, Jens Leifeld, who is from Agroscope, Switzerland, and he's going to talk about how to consider climate benefits of rewetting peatlands in carbon farming schemes. So, do you hear us?
Good afternoon. Do you hear me and can you see me?
Yes, we can see you and we can hear you. Now we are waiting for your presentation.
So you don't see my presentation?
Okay, now we can see your presentation, so please go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody, and sorry for the technical issue. I have an echo, so I hear my voice twice. But I don't try to check the system again because I had some issues over the last 10 minutes. So this short presentation is about how to consider climate benefits in schemes. Ready? With very strong emissions from drained peatlands worldwide, which is about 5% of anthropogenic emissions. And in some northern countries, as we heard today, this proportion is much higher. And we also know that with rewetting, we have a very strong reduction in those emissions in almost all climatic zones and under many conditions. So when we rewet and raise the water table, we have the effect of dropping the CO2 emission and may even go to a CO2 uptake in some systems, but at the expense of higher methane emissions. And so these numbers are taken from two more publications by the teammate Chris Evans, which are used to do some calculations to address the following three questions. The first one is, when does the rewetted site become climate neutral? Second is, what is the climate effect of a non-permanent rewetting? And finally, how can we account for only temporary rewetting in carbon farming schemes? Now, what we can do with these emissions is we can convert them into radiative forcing. And if we calculate the cumulative radiative forcing, we get a unit which is called absolute global warming potential. And this is very useful to compare different systems. Shown here is for a timeline over 500 years, the absolute global warming potential of three different water level situations: deep drainage of -60, shallow drainage of -15, and rewetting of -5 centimeters. And you see for the deep and medium drainage that there's an increase in the global warming potential over time, whereas for the rewetting situation, we are close to neutral and after around 400 years, the warming turns into net cooling. And this switch is called switchover time. We can calculate those switchover times along a gradient of water tables, which is the lower right figure. And we can do this for the cumulative forcing as done before, but we can also do this for the instantaneous forcing. And in both instances, we learn that the switchover times are in the order of some centuries. We also see that for this data, the optimal water table is close below the surface. And most important, we see that we also have a climate benefit of revetting relative to the business as usual from the very beginning. Now, what I want to stress a little bit more is the question of what happens if this revetting is not permanent. So if you have a project failure, and listed here are some possible reasons why a project can fail. And we can use this type of calculations to see what is the change in the atmospheric greenhouse gas concentrations or in the warming relative to successful revetting. In this graph, you see the lower gray line, which is the evolution of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere over 100 years for successful revetting. So we are still in the positive range. We are still warming, but to a very small degree, as compared to the business as usual, which is the uppermost gray line, where we have very strong increase in atmospheric concentrations. All these gray lines in between 2040, 70 denote situations where we start with revetting, but after some decades, the system switches back into a dry situation again. Now, the benefit of full revetting as compared to business as usual is proportional to the area of this, or to the blue area that you see. This would be for 100 years timeline of full revetting as compared to this. Able to be successful for, say, 40 years, then the overall benefit is getting smaller, of course, but we still have a benefit. We can now use this the endpoints of those graphs to see what is the relationship with the duration of successful revetting as compared to a full revetting and the avoided warming as compared to the maximum. So in this example, the maximum revetting would be 100 years. And for example, look at the blue line. If we are successful for only 50 years, and after that the system falls dry again, we would have been achieving 74% of the maximum avoidable warming. This blue line is shaped and is different to a straight line, which goes from the origin lower left to the 1,000 tons on the upper right, if you would only look at the saved soil carbon loss, because in this calculation I use constant carbon emission rates of 10 tons. So this calculation shows that certification or any policy instrument should ideally be based on combined effect of greenhouse gases. In this example, I only CO2 and methane, but N2O would also be included, of course, and considers their fate over time. And this gives us a different answer as compared if you would only look at the soil carbon alone. This calculation is now over 100 years, but we may also consider of project durations where the full payment is already done for maybe only 30 or 50 years. And we can see that the shape of the function is always the same. So relative to a successful revetting, may it be that the benchmark is 30 years or 100 years or 500 years, the avoided warming as percentage of the maximum is always the same. So always in the order of, as the previous example, 74% when we are successful in 50% of the time. Now to conclude, so before I sum up, I would like to stress a point that's the non-permanent revetting that I was discussing a bit here is, from my understanding, technically the same as a displaced emission. And this doesn't improve the climate situation in the long run, it just buys us some time. But in the context of carbon farming projects, we may also think about those shorter time frames that are illustrated here. And within those shorter time frames, we can say that we also have a climate benefit for non-permanent revetting. Of course, this is smaller as the revetting would be permanent. And if you are interested in this discussion on displaced emissions, you can look up this paper that I published a couple of weeks ago. And finally, I think that the carbon schemes may use the avoided warming, which is shown in the blue area, relative to the business as usual, to inform crediting and therefore also to inform rewarding farmers or landowners. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Jens. I think we have time for one brief question. Any comments, questions? Okay, then we'll continue with the program. Thank you very much, Jens. And now we have our third commentary speaker, Johanna Vanhatalo, who is from the Ministry of Agriculture and Forestry of Finland. And she's going to talk about Finland's policy perspective.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I think we can all agree that we have heard so many interesting and inspiring speeches already today, and we have heard about the advantages and the ways to promote mitigation measures on organic soils. And now I'm going to showcase you briefly what are the tools and measures for us from the policy perspective, from the ministry perspective, how are we implementing all this knowledge base into practice? So this slide is just mainly to remind you about the climate policy levels that we're operating at the ministry. So basically we have international level and EU level obligations. And in addition to that, we have national level strategies, programs, legislation, and other instruments. So what is the current state of play in Finland? As you heard from Kristiina's presentation, Finland aims to be carbon neutral by 2035 and carbon negative soon after that. In 2021, our agriculture-related emissions were 13% share of the total greenhouse gas emissions in Finland. And this actually only includes the agriculture emissions in the effort sharing sector. And if we include the agriculture-related CO2 emissions from the LULUCF sector, the share is actually much bigger. I think it's close to even 30% nowadays. And if you look at the picture compared to many other EU countries, Finland actually has a quite large organic carbon content, which also partly explains why organic soils are often under discussion in Finland. Well, Kristiina already described the typicalities of Finnish agriculture in her presentation, so no need to repeat that. Just maybe add a few comments that Finland is considered to be the most northern agriculture country in the world. So of course that sets some requirements for our agriculture. Basically, Finland's agriculture relies heavily on grassland and cereal varieties that are suited to northern climate. Our agriculture area is about 2.3 million hectares, of which around 12% is located on peat soils. And the picture, it showcases that the GHG emissions from croplands in the LULUCF sector, so basically the cultivated peat soils have a relatively small share of the area, but high share of agricultural emissions in the LULUCF sector. So how are we responding to this challenge? As I already mentioned, we're aiming for carbon neutrality. And in addition to that, our current government, Prime Minister Sanna Marin's government, has set an ambitious emission reduction target for Finnish agriculture, minus 29% by 2035. And we have strategies, plans, other instruments that include mitigation measures that are targeted at agricultural peat soils, such as CAP strategic plan, which is of course our most important instrument, and it also includes most of the money. Then we have medium-term climate change policy plan, which is written in every 4 years, so basically once in every governmental period. Nowadays, we also have a climate plan for the land use sector. Then we have cross-sectoral working group that has been appointed to prepare measures that may supplement the climate plan for the land use sector. We have Catch the Carbon Government program, and then we have EU legislation, which is also binding. Here's an overview of the specific agriculture measures that we are currently implementing, both through Common Agriculture Policy and through other national measures. I won't go into details, but this is mainly to show you that a lot is already going on in Finland. We have also evaluated the key measures of our current Common Agriculture Policy strategic plan for reducing emissions in the agriculture sector and in the LULUCF sector. And as you may notice, CAC 2 protection of wetlands and peatlands is the most effective one, although other measures are also important, and they of course also do their share when aiming for carbon neutrality. So a few words about CAC 2, protection of wetlands. After 2022, areas that are taken into agricultural use by clearing other areas or otherwise must be permanently on grassland. Grassland can be renewed to direct sowing or reduce tillage so that the new grassland is sown immediately after the tillage, and the plowing is forbidden. However, this grass requirement does not apply to new areas in accordance with land consolidation decisions or changes that aim to improve the shape of parcels, and also plan to cover not only cleared areas but also old peat production areas. And from 2025 onwards, there will be a few changes. After that, soil may not be extracted from agricultural peatland anymore. Agricultural land must not be burned. No new open ditches may be digged on agricultural peatland. And permanent grasslands that are located on peatland may only be plowed during once every 4-year period. So in addition to Common Agriculture Policy, one very essential tool to implement the climate measures that are targeted at agricultural organic soils is our new climate plan for the land use sector. Our very first climate plan for the land use sector was first implemented last year. And it also aims to contribute to our climate neutrality target. And just to be short, as I see I only have 2 minutes left, the plan includes more than 30 policy measures, of which 7 is actually targeted on agricultural soils. And these measures are, for example, raising the water level in peatland fields, establishing climate wetlands, and preparing a roadmap for the use of peatland fields in Finland. And of course, we always emphasize that the sustainability needs to take taken into account when implementing policy measures, climate policy measures, and we want to see that environmental, social, and economical sustainability are all important, and also we need to remember the biodiversity aspects as well. And just to conclude, I wish to share with you one very concrete and innovative example of our current policy measure that we have. Here in Finland, as you might remember from yesterday, from our permanent secretary Jaana Husukallio's opening speech, our ministry has been coordinating Catch the Carbon government program since 2020. And under this program, more than 100 research, innovation, and development projects have been funded. And the total public investment for this project, or for this package, is over 1 million euros. And Catch the Carbon program, it contains a good number of climate measures that also concern, in addition to agriculture, they also concern forestry and other land use changes. And if we look at from the agriculture perspective, the aim is to reduce emissions from peatlands farming, increase carbon sequestration, develop paludiculture and promote the marketing of its products, diversify farming, promote international initiatives such as Forber Mill. As you might remember, this conference has also been funded by our ministry through Catch the Carbon program. And we're also aiming at developing our greenhouse gas inventory and monitoring system, since we think it's very important that we will get all the emission reduction measures that have been taken. They should also be visible at our national greenhouse gas inventory. And to conclude, we have also put special emphasis on communication, knowledge building, and enhancing cooperation between public and private actors. And I think that was my last slide. Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Johanna, and thanks to all speakers today. I'm afraid we need to end this session because we need to free this room for the next users. So now we have a coffee and poster session in the conference building, and the program will continue in the main hall at 3:30. So thanks very much for participating.